Okay, this PowerPoint goes over wood framing, and most of our residential houses and our utility shed are made out of wood because it's a very common, inexpensive item, and it's strong enough for houses to be built out of. And this is going to go over some of our basic parts. I've given you a handout, the little color printed handout. I want you to glue it in, and as you go through the components, you need to label every component on there that's labeled in the video. So pause, glue it in, and pause and rewind as you need to get all your components labeled. So these are all the parts we're going to talk about. Starting at the very bottom, you have joists, and they're on 16 or 24 inches apart. And it may not make a lot of sense of why they're at 16 or 24, but on top of those joists, we put plywood down. And we have plywood or OSB. This is actually flat sheets, and it looks like this, where they're different layers of the wood that have been cut very thin and pressed together with glue. And this one is actually pieces of wood that have been chopped up and then glued back together. And they're both types of plywood, and they both come in 4-foot by 8-foot sheets. So let's see if we can figure out why these are in 16 or 24. Well, if we take a second to throw a calculator up here, an 8-foot sheet is 8 foot times 12 inches, which means it's 96 inches long. If I divide that by 24, I get a nice even 4 joists per 8-foot section of floor. If I do the same thing with the 16 inches, I'll see that the 16 inches would give me a nice 6 joists per sheet of the plywood. That's why we use 16 or 24, because it means that we're going to have a piece of plywood fit very nicely on there and end up on the joist on both ends, and I don't have to cut any off or waste it. That's why it's always 16 or 24. And that's basically how we design all of our walls, floors, roofs, all on the 16 or 24 inches apart measurements. So we have the subfloor above the joist, and then we start building the walls. Notice that the way they put the walls in is they run a 2x4 like this, and then the rest of them are put in like this. These are actually made on when it's laying down, not built standing up. It's built when it's laying down, and they nail from the bottom up into each of these and the top down, and then they stand the whole thing up and nail this down into those joists below it. We call these uprights studs, and there are vertical members in our walls. They're called studs. And they're made out of 2x4s or 2x6s. And this refers to 2 inches by 4 inches, but the truth is that a 2x4 is not 2 inches by 4 inches. That's actually the green width and length of the board. Once they dry the wood, it shrinks a little bit, and it's about 1.5 by 3.5, or here 1.5 by 5.5. And those are just standard. Notice 16 by 24 is the same we had before. Here where you see OC, that means on center. What that means is if I start at the center of this board and measure to the center of this board, it'll be 16 inches, or it would be 24 inches if it was another one. So OC means on center. Be sure you write these things down as we go through the notes, because you're going to use it in Revit and everything else we do. This top board is called the top plate, and often there are 2 boards there. And notice here at the corner that this one is coming in and stops right here, and this one extends over. The one below it would be just the opposite, where this one comes down and this one is stopping short, so that it's double. That's a double top plate when we have 2 different boards at the top there. It makes the wall stronger, and it connects those 2 walls together here at the corner. The bottom is called the sole plate or the sill plate. A sill, like a window sill, is the bottom. And again, it was originally, this whole wall was built laying down so that the studs were glued into this, or were nailed into this, and then it stood up to anchor this onto the floor. If we put a window opening in, this top board is called the header board. And notice that we've cut this stud short here, and this header board is running flat. We have one that's running flat here on top, and then one that's been put in vertical there. That's what's going to support our window, or if we had a door opening. The bottom of the window is called the sill. You're probably used to the window sill. And again, it's been put in there with this board below it, and that's what's going to support our window when we put it in. On the top, we have trusses. If you're from POE, you're familiar with trusses, but basically most roofs are put together with trusses. And here we can see the triangular shape we see in trusses. We'll talk about trusses a little bit later. Again, these are spaced either 16 or 24 inches apart as well. In between the studs, we put in insulation, and we'll talk about different kinds of insulation. But basically, it's the insulation that, for us in Texas, keeps the heat out. And for most other parts in the world, they're interested in keeping the heat in during the winter. On top of the plywood, on top of the insulation, we put a layer of plywood or OSB that we talked about before, and that goes on the walls and the roof. On top of that, we have to put a vapor barrier. Basically, this is a thin film that's like plastic. It's like a thin film. And basically what it allows is it allows the moisture that's inside your house to get out without allowing moisture outside to get in. If you think about it, there's lots of activities you do inside a house, like washing clothes, washing dishes, taking hot showers, boiling water for coffee or pasta or whatever you're boiling, that creates a lot of water vapor inside the house. If the house didn't allow that vapor to get out, you would end up having mold build up inside your house, and that would be a terrible thing. So this outside layer right here allows the vapor to get out without allowing water to get in from the outside. Okay, then on top of that, we have some kind of siding. And here we're using siding to mean any surface we're going to put on the outside. Usually it's some kind of pressed board or shingles on the outside. We could also have plywood, hardwood, plastic, vinyl, stucco, brick, stone, whatever we're putting on the very outside of our house. On our roof, on top of the plywood, we have a roof felt. It's literally a piece of fabric that has tar that's been put into that fabric. So it's kind of thick and it's waterproof. On top of that roofing tar, we put on the shingles. Around here, most of our shingles are asphalt shingles, so they're asphalt like the road, and they're black with little grains in them, little granules. But they can also be made out of wood in this area. You also see clay, like on the Spanish houses, or you could have slate. Metal shingles are now becoming pretty popular as well, so the shingles can be made out of a number of different materials. Okay, that's it for our wood framing. Make sure you got all these notes written down.